old friend of mine and a very well-known and well-established scholar of the Middle East in general and the Gulf in particular. And he's speaking to us, I think, on a subject that will be of increasing interest here in Singapore as the convergences we're seeing all around us between Asia and the Middle East continue to increase. And today we're going to hear about a particularly important but not very well known aspect of that convergence, and that has to do with the growing role of India in the region. And I'm happy to say, therefore, that our friends and colleagues at the Institute for South Asian Studies are co-sponsoring this event with us, and we're very happy to welcome those of you who come from ISS. And we in MEI are the other pole of this tandem event because the GCC countries, the countries of the Gulf, are extremely great interest to us. And in fact, some of you will know MEI will be organizing a major conference on developments in the Gulf for next May 19th and 20th. So put that in your calendars. That will be a major international conference with a number of high-level figures from the Gulf and from around the world who will be coming to give us an assessment of overall developments in the region. Let me say something about our guest. There's a great deal to be said. Joseph Kechichian is now has been for a while, the CEO of his own company, Kechichian and Associates, which is a consulting partnership that focuses on the Arabian-Persian Gulf region. And that means, of course, that his organization and he himself specialize in the affairs and concerns of Bahrain, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and, I'm glad to see, Yemen. We're stretching the Gulf just a little bit, but there's all sorts of reasons for including Yemen. Joe is also the honorary consul of the Sultanate of Oman in Los Angeles, where he resides. And so he carries a certain diplomatic as well as academic cachet. I got to know him many years ago when he was finishing his doctorate at the University of Virginia, and he also taught there. He was later an assistant dean. He's had many fellowships at the Hoover Institution. He's taught or worked at the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica. He's lectured at UCLA. He's been a fellow at the von Grunebaum Center for Near Eastern Studies at UCLA, which is one of the more important Middle East centers in the United States. And the list goes on. He's got a very substantial record of research and publications, including studies such as political participation and stability in Oman, the emergence of an independent foreign policy for Oman. He has written more recently about the United Arab Emirates, edited a book called A Century in 30 Years, Sheikh Zayed, the founder really, of the modern United Arab Emirates. He has co-authored books in political science, and in 2008 he published 2 new volumes called Power and Succession in Arab Monarchies and a biography of King Faisal of Saudi Arabia entitled Faisal, Saudi Arabia's King for All Seasons. Dr. Kechichian appears and comments on many television and radio outlets in the United States, and I have to conclude by noting his language skills, which are really formidable. In addition to his native Armenian and Arabic, he speaks English, French, Italian, Turkish, and it says here is learning Persian. But today he's not going to talk to us so much about Persia or Turkey or Italy or France or Armenia, I dare say, but he is going to talk to us about India and the GCC, a nascent alliance. So we welcome Dr. Kechichian to MEI and look forward to his talk. And following his remarks, we will, as we always do, open the floor for your comments and questions. So, ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you. You can all hear me, right? Great. Well, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've had the pleasure of knowing Michael Hudson for a few years, but I've also met Ambassador Verghese Matthews a couple of years ago in Riyadh, and so I consider myself among friends here in Singapore. This is my first visit, hopefully not my last. Now, as you've heard from Professor Hudson's presentation, my research efforts have always concentrated on the Arab Gulf monarchies, focusing on succession matters, socio-political developments, and foreign policy concerns. When you research and write 12 books on the region, it requires extensive visits to the area. In fact, I'm coming on this trip from Saudi Arabia as well. But at the same time, when you happen to be living in the Gulf countries, you are brought face to face with the huge expatriate population there. It's natural, obviously, that one would eventually visit India, which I have done twice so far, though I anticipate that my 10 years multiple entry visa will be used more frequently in the future. I share this with you so that you do not conclude that my knowledge of the subcontinent is nil or rudimentary. On the contrary, over the past few years, and through contributions to Gulf News, where I write a weekly column every Thursday in Dubai, as you know, I'm sure Gulf News has a huge Indian readership. My interests in India grew dramatically, and I've been writing on questions that pertain to India, which is why I embarked on this current project, looking at the relationship between the GCC countries and India. There are a couple of points that I would like to make at the beginning before I go formally into the presentation. Obviously, the first point is that we have to understand the emerging alliances between conservative Arab Gulf monarchies in India. Why do we need to do this? Because A, there are serious energy dependencies on both sides. Two, there is a presence of a very large expatriate presence in the Gulf. And three, or C, traditional policies of non-interference in India obviously carry a great deal of weight in the conservative monarchies. There are 6 of them, as you know, but they have very unsecure relationships with India. These are small monarchies who do not really know or have not really learned how to handle the world's largest democracy. The question that we have to ask ourselves is whether these conservative monarchies really share India's strategic interests today and in the future. Now, at this second point, at this stage of this research effort, I have many more questions than I have answers. Obviously, I have not completed this research, so hopefully in the question and answer period, we'll have an opportunity to get some of your feedback so that I can better direct the course of my research in the future. But some of the questions that I have so far are the following. GCC states' cooperation track record is very limited. Amongst themselves, these military and economic powers are very limited indeed. They are much more at ease with Britain, with the United States, with France, than it is, let's say, Saudi Arabia is with the UAE, or Oman is with Qatar. So therefore, they have an outward look rather than having an inward look. Some people say they don't trust each other that much, although that's probably taking it a step too far. The GCC is an experiment so far. Despite the hoopla, it has not really been a stellar record. Second, GCC countries have political, economic, social, and military capabilities, but none of these can really respond to regional threats coming from Iran, from Iraq, not now, during Saddam Hussein's period, but in the future, if Iraq were to reconstitute into a real power again, which it will over the course of time. With India, obviously, Pakistan, and in the African subcontinent, in the Horn of Africa, there are several very important countries over which GCC countries keep a very close eye. Therefore, India is positioned very nicely in this region. How it develops its strategic relationship with these countries becomes important as well. The contrary is also true, that India also has not so far really determined what its regional strategy going to be. It has always been mesmerized by Pakistan and China, its two rivals, if you would like, and it's only recently that it's really been looking at the Arabian Peninsula with particular interest. Now, finally, I will say a few words, general points about GCC-India ties, and because of time restraints, what I thought I would do, I mean, I could go on and talk until tomorrow, but you'll be bored to death. I don't want to do that. What I would like to do is take one of these countries, a country that I know quite well, Oman, and use that as an example in terms of Indian-Omani relations from which we can extrapolate for the rest of the Gulf countries. Now, here's the formal paper, therefore. As many of you know, India ruled the Gulf region from Bombay, today's Mumbai, not from London. Many of the civil servants it recruited were Indians. Its armies, levies really at the time, in the Gulf were composed of Indians. Though India was the so-called jewel in the crown, it was in reality the fodder for Britain's perpetual wars long before the United States embarked on a similarly doomed adventure. For our purposes, it is important to note that Indians were present on the Arabian Peninsula long before the 1970s, when the numbers soared. Today, India is a growing power, its economy growing on average between 7 and 9% per year, which means that it needs access to secure oil and gas resources in the Persian Gulf for the foreseeable future. Fast-growing Indian firms and policymakers are looking for investment opportunities, sale of consumer goods, tourism, and education throughout the region. Parenthetically, if my two lecturing opportunities at Nehru University in Delhi are any indication of the student talent in India, the results will be nothing but impressive in the future. And I'm sure some of you know, it is now more competitive to enter the Kharagpur Institute of Technology than it is to enter the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So that gives you an idea how far ahead India has come. This is a parenthesis. Equally important are the political contacts between India and the GCC states led by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. King Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz's first foreign trip as monarch in 2005 was to Delhi, where he was the guest of honor at the National Day. Unlike French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who followed him in that honor more recently, Abdullah spent several days in India, meeting a slew of dignitaries. Sarkozy stayed about 16 hours. That's 6 more than his latest trip in Seoul, by the way. So that's progress. But here I digress. My point is that the leading GCC states, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is increasingly aware of India's weight. The fact that there may be nearly 5 million or perhaps up to 7 million Indian expatriate workers in the Gulf states is surely a critical feature of these ties. This is part of an overall expatriate population of roughly 20 million people in the Gulf. So we're talking about on the Arabian Peninsula, if you don't include Yemen, you have rough parity, 60 to 40% between locals and indigenous population. In some countries like the UAE, the number of expatriate population officially is 70%, but in reality is probably close to 85%. So that gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Of course, for Delhi, West Asia was paramount to its long-term security considerations, on par with relations with Iran, with Pakistan, and China. We know that the 5 to 7 million Indians in the GCC countries support, in turn, nearly 100 million. One person in the Gulf supports 20 people in India, financially, and remitting billions of dollars, obviously. When the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1991 occurred, it highlighted this plight. Remittances from the GCC states in that year accounted for 7% of India's GDP. By 2008, that percentage jumped to 14% of India's GDP. Needless to say that India is dependent on GCC economies, but this is, of course, a double-edged sword. For if anything goes wrong, GCC states would come to a standstill without their critical expatriate population. I can hardly see how the UAE would function without the Indians. It's just not imaginable. Let me at this juncture give you a few figures that will illustrate the degree of this mutual dependency. One, demand for energy consumption in India will increase dramatically from about 435 kilowatt of electricity per capita per person in 2004 to over 1,000 kilowatt of electricity in 2015 per capita per year. Today, India uses 421 million tons of coal per year. Sorry, in 2004, it used 421 million tons of coal per year, and it will need more in the future. It consumes 2.6 million barrels of oil per day, though it only produces 900,000 barrels. Its estimated reserves are roughly 5.6 billion, which is pittance compared to what you have in a country like Saudi Arabia, sitting on 270 billion barrels of proven reserves. So it gives you an idea of the fact that these imports today, 1.7 million barrels per year, 70% of consumption, will have to go up significantly. By 2030, it's estimated that India will import maybe 5 million barrels of oil per day. Per day. So that's significant. Same for natural gas. India does have a small reserve of natural gas, about 35 to 40 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, but obviously that's not sufficient because it has a huge population. It's already importing natural gas from places like Qatar and Oman, as you will see in a second. Second point. In 2007, India purchased $12 billion worth of petroleum from Saudi Arabia alone, which amounted to 26% of its overall petroleum imports. Needless to say that the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, even Oman were all poised to benefit from similar steps in the future. Three, India's GCC bilateral trade figures in the year 2008 stood at $87 billion. Now, this bilateral figure in 2008 was larger than Indian-European bilateral trade, which only stood at 80 billion. It was larger than Indian ASEAN countries' bilateral trade, which stood at 45 billion. It was even larger than the Indian-US bilateral trade, which stood at 41 billion. All of these figures for 2008. In short, the numbers tell the whole story. Finally, final point, and I will come back to this in the Omani example, and this is where we really have to think long-term. When I say long-term, I'm not thinking the next 5 years to 10 years. I'm thinking the next generation, really. There is very close relationship on security and defense matters between the GCC countries and India, especially in counterterrorism efforts. Some joint training at the naval level, but this is very slow, and it will stay slow for the foreseeable future because of the importance of Pakistan. Pakistan historically has provided the security setup for all these Gulf countries. And those of you who have visited the region will immediately know who the Pakistanis are because they are the ones over the dishtashas that wear jackets. These are the security guys. And they're all over the place, obviously. They have had the security portfolio, if you would like, in a place like Abu Dhabi for the past 40 years, and elsewhere throughout the region too. Now, it is my hope that when I finish this research effort, I will have a lot better detailed assessment of Indian GCC ties, which, as I say, will grow in the future and solidify the nascent economic, political, and perhaps military alliances emerging. Let me now turn to Oman as the example to give you a flavor of my thesis. First, some background, because everybody assumes that Oman and India are alien to each other, they don't know about each other. Nothing can be farther from the truth. Because of their proximity, I'm sure if you look at a map, you'll notice this. Muscat is closer to Mumbai than it is to Cairo. It only takes less than 2 hours to fly from Muscat to Mumbai, and it takes over 3 hours to get to Cairo. So that gives you an idea of geography of what we're talking about. Because of their proximity to Oman, as well as their rich and varied legacies, India and Pakistan have played important roles in Omani foreign policy. Geography and trade were the driving forces behind every contact between them. Much of these relationships were strengthened when trade contacts improved. That in turn introduced both a sense of rivalry and of cooperation. During Oman's imperial period, for example, the subcontinent was a prime target for successive rulers who perceived an economic need to expand beyond their borders. Some of you may know, but others might not know, that Oman used to be a maritime empire, and it actually had a presence on the Indian subcontinent as well as most of East Africa today. The Omani Empire stretched for a long sway of space, if you would like. Since 1970, a proximity of ideas and kinship were added to establish economic interests and alliances. Aware of the Indian subcontinent's potential in the region, Oman developed specific policies towards India. In turn, it recognized the Sultanate's unique capabilities in the region and throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Omanis first came in contact with Indians under the Sumerian and Harappan civilizations. Early tradesmen in the Indus Valley, who traded in copper and other metals, became interested in Oman because of vast copper deposits in the Sultanate. Although little is known about the early settlements of Indians, significant contacts were established as far back as 600 AD. Hindu temple ruins in Kalhat in Oman date to the 15th century. It suggests that a number of Indians settled there earlier than generally assumed. Further evidence of this early presence was the recorded plight of Hindu merchants from Korfahan before the Portuguese sacked the city in 1507. In fact, Indians played a crucial role in the trade that dominated Omani ties with the Portuguese and other foreign powers for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. Commercial life in Muscat and Matrah was for all practical purposes in the hands of Banyan merchants. That influence was so prevalent that Indian merchants gained strength and replaced the Al Busaid rulers as the paramount economic power in Oman. And because of this presence, and save for the Iranian, Zanzibari, and British involvement in Oman, India played the most crucial role in shaping the Sultanate's modern history. Unfortunately, these ties were neglected for most of the 20th century for Omani domestic reasons, power struggle that really saw the Al Busaid go through a very difficult time. Notwithstanding small population, however, noticeable improvements occurred after the 1970 period when Qaboos bin Said came to power. Both sides realized that they have to improve ties. Now, I can give you some more background on the historical ties. I don't know whether any of you are interested in this. Perhaps, how much time do I have, Michael, to go through this?
You have as much time as you wish.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, maybe I'll go. Maybe I'll give you some because I don't know whether everybody here knows about this background. So it's very valuable to refresh our memory. Let's look at the historical ties. Under the Rashidun Caliphate, Omanis joined the Arab conquest of Persia by volunteering troops and materials. We're talking a period 600-700 AD. Therefore, Omani. Remember, the Omanis are a seafaring nation, so the seafarers raided Western India until about 1700s or so. In the 11th century, Mahmud al-Ghazni launched a number of deadly raids on the Indian coastline and subjugated his enemies by forcing them to abandon their warrior heritage in favor of farming and trade. These early successes led to the Omani imperial expansion during the reign of Bararam bin Sultan and Saif bin Sultan, early 1700s. Both of these were part of the Ya'riba dynasty, which would eventually collapse. Mumbai, today, Bombay in the old days, was attacked but never conquered by the Omanis. Other cities along the coast fared less well. Despite these violent raids that did not endear attackers to the Indian population, a large number traveled to Oman, where many settled and started the lucrative business relationships that continued over the years. Not even the British occupation of India could prevent this trade from flourishing, even if Omani-Indian relations became subservient to London after Britain gained control over the entire subcontinent. One of the earliest communities to establish roots in Oman were the Batiyas from the Sindh province. The Batiyas, who were settled in Sindh as well as in Kutch provinces since the 11th century, launched commercial contacts with their counterparts throughout the Arabian Peninsula in Africa, and by the 17th century, the number of Batiyas increased to Muscat and throughout the Batina coast. The Batina coast goes all the way from Muscat northwards towards the UAE, and it is the most fertile region of Oman. There is actually water there. The other region, for those of you who are not familiar with Oman, is in the south near Salalah. Because of the monsoon rains, it tends to be very lush very quickly. In time, and especially during the Portuguese occupation of Oman, the number of Sindh and Kutch province populations, the Batiyas, were unparalleled, with unparalleled business skills, obviously enhanced their regional trade. Major towns in Sindh were linked to the coastal city of Tata, not the current company that everybody knows in India, the famous Tata, but there used to be a city called Tata as well, with an H in it. The company doesn't have the H. T-A-T-T-H-A. That played a critical role in providing much needed labor to the myriad of enterprises that were created over a very short period of time. In addition to grain, Tata encouraged the production of silk products, cotton yarns, opium, ghee, indigo, sugar, and many other items to meet a growing demand on the Arabian, African, as well as Central Asian markets. Sindh province became a powerhouse in the trade world that in turn necessitated the rise of a middle and upper class establishment of money changers, bankers, shopkeepers, and sellers. For most of these merchants and bankers, Muscat was the key entrepot, capable of servicing markets within a very large area. Now think about that today, in terms of the Gulf countries acting also as an entrepot for Indian tradesmen working throughout the Gulf region, in fact throughout the Middle East. The Tata-Muscat trade, many believe, was so lucrative that any power that gained control over it would inherit commercial as well as strategic advantages. Indeed, this was one of the reasons why the British pursued the Portuguese so fiercely and first broached the idea of defeating Lisbon in Southwest Asia. For all their political justifications to mobilize against the Portuguese, including differences in European political affairs, economic interests dictated that Britain oppose Portugal. Business rules prevailed. All parties knew that. Trade through Muscat brought in generous custom levies that represented a handsome additional income. After all, Muscat was chosen as a favorite entrepot because successive sultans granted special concessions as no poll taxes were levied on Indian merchants. Both Lisbon and London were amply aware of these privileges and sought to endear themselves with all parties before they deployed forces to occupy the area. For the Indians, life in Muscat retained its beneficial aspects too, no matter who was in charge. Tolerant, Ibadi traditions allowed Hindus. I should stop here. Do you know what Ibadis are? If anybody does not know, I will tell you. That's a very good question. I always make the assumption that the terms that I'm using, audience members know. I apologize. Omanis, of course, are Muslim, but they're neither Sunni nor Shia. They are Ibadi. Ibadism is an offshoot sect of Shia Islam that was part of the Khariji movement at the very beginning of Islam. The Ibadi theology is much closer to Sunnism, even though they are offshoot sect of Shiism themselves. But today, they are much closer to the original interpretations of the Quran as the companions of the Prophet originally provided. Over the years, there have been lots of schisms between all these different sects. So the Ibadi traditions are quite distinct from Shia Islam or Twelver Islam, if you would like, the majority of Shias being Twelver Muslims. Let me give you a couple of examples that you will know the difference. One example is that there is no political isti'rad in Ibadi Islam. There is no political murder. It's forbidden. You cannot assassinate somebody because you don't like his nose. Well, you could, but you're not supposed to. It cannot be religiously justified, in other words, to attack or murder a political leader on religious grounds. You can do it on other grounds, but not on religious grounds. Whereas in traditional Shia Islam, Twelver Islam, isti'rad is an accepted theological formula. If the ruler is unjust, you can remove him by all means possible, including the use of force. Another example would be a very tolerant approach. Just like the original companions of the Prophet, Muhammad, the people of the book obviously were considered to be equals, literally. Even though over the years, the dogma that has been interpreted and reinterpreted created all these differences that today we see enacted in front of us. There are many other differences as well, but Ibadi traditions are very distinct, and they are practiced in Oman and a few other places only, some in Zanzibar, in today's Africa, some in North Africa, in Morocco and in Algeria. There are some today Ibadi traditions that are alive. Yes?
Didn't the Sultan depose of his father in a forceful manner?
Say again, I couldn't hear you.
Didn't the Sultan depose of his father, Taimur, in a forceful manner?
Not really. He was not assassinated. Sultan Qaboos overthrew his father in 1970, but that was more of a palace coup. With the full knowledge of the British and with the cooperation of the British. Now, I know what you're referring to. You're referring to the fact that the old man, in his haste to leave, shot himself in the foot. But nobody killed him. He was trying to shoot one of the policemen that came to arrest him and put him on the next plane. And because he was such a great marksman, he shot himself. But he was immediately taken to Bahrain because the closest hospital in those days was in Bahrain. And after a few days of recuperation, he ended up in London. He died at the Dorchester Hotel, and actually he's buried in England. But he was not assassinated. And Qaboos, I mean, I've met him a few times. I know him. He is a very gentle soul. He will not do things like that. Of course, he's an autocrat. No question about that. Oman is a monarchy. And in a monarchy, see, the definition of a monarchy is that it is not a republic. That's sometimes we forget that. You know, monarchies are not democracies. They are monarchies. And there is one man in charge at any given time, or one woman in charge. There were queens at one point. You know, the Queen of Sheba in Yemen. So, but I digress. But I want to just this brief parenthesis about ibadism, that way we know what we're talking about. It's a fascinating, I go to Oman on a regular basis, and my best meetings are with the Mufti of the Sultanate, who obviously is an ibadi. I've known him for many years. He's a very nice gentleman. He always receives me very kindly. He always trying to convert me. He always wants me to become an ibadi. And I tell him, I happen to be a happy Catholic. That doesn't bother me. And I tell him, don't worry, I've invented a new religion. I'm a Mushi, I tell him. A Muslim and a Masihi. So I put them together, Masihi meaning Christian in Arabic. So I'm a combination, I tell him, of a Christian and a Muslim. So he's happy with that for the time being. But they're very nice, tolerant people. Okay, I go back to my paper. You can tell I'm having fun doing this. Tolerant Ibadi traditions, as I said, allowed the Hindus to build a temple in Muscat after a large number arrived from Basra. An anti-Hindu uprising in Basra, in Iraq, had allowed Hindus to escape there, and many left wondering whether they could continue to live safely. To demonstrate their allegiance to Muscat and to cement their sense of belonging in their new land, members of the new temple gave their idol, a representation of the deity Govindraj, an Omani dagger in its vestments. This was a monumental act of allegiance that was favorably noticed by Omani rulers. Although 4 Hindu temples were established in Muscat by the mid-1760s, and Indians continued to prosper under the Al-Musaid dynasty, Tata faced an economic collapse in the early 1800s. When a strong challenge emerged from the Hindu community in Kutch, however, the Tatas entered a competition with the Sindhis. No longer could the Sindhis enjoy a monopoly on lucrative trade routes going through Muscat. Still, Hindu merchants did not consider Muscat to be just an entrepot. Rather, many brought their families along with them. They established homes in Oman, and in time, several trading merchants played key roles in Omani political life. When an influential Hindu merchant by the name of Narutem wanted to prevent a Portuguese officer from marrying one of his daughters, for example, he offered his services to sabotage the Portuguese garrison. Sultan bin Saif was successful in defeating the Portuguese, in part because of this valuable assistance from the Indian merchants. Nevertheless, British influence throughout the area meant that the Indian presence was expendable. By the middle of the 19th century, Hindu merchants withdrew from Oman. Many returned to India, even if dozens of families stayed on. With the expulsion of the Portuguese from the Indian Ocean, Tata experienced a general economic decline as the British preferred to deal with Surat and Bombay. Nature was equally unkind to the population of Tata as the Indus River changed course, stripping the city of its waterway access. To make matters worse, Muslim Talpur dynasty chiefs who gained control over Sindh province in the 1780s persecuted Hindus who fled to Karachi. Given their skills, Sindhis could well have continued their trade through Karachi were it not for 2 additional factors. The new rulers of Muscat were not content with custom levies generated through existing firms. As I said, the defeat of the Yaruba dynasty was tragic in Omani history, where you went from literally riches to rags with internal disputes and the kind of tribalism that was so prevalent at that time that saw entire families and communities destroyed. Al-Musaid mercantile activities meant that the Sindhis had to compete directly with the ruling family. Although no Hindus were expelled from Oman, few were encouraged to remain in such prominent roles and compete with Muscat's leading family. What was even more devastating to the Sindhis in Muscat was the rise of another group of Bhatia merchants, the Kutchis. Now, semi-arid and isolated Kutch, lying to the east of the Indus River mouth, lived through the sea. Throughout the clairvoyant leadership of its ruler, Goji II, Kutchi seafarers launched a massive shipbuilding program, in large measure to seek an alternative source of income. The construction of several dams on the Indus River impacted negatively on Kuchi agriculture that left many able-bodied persons idle. In addition to the dam, famine and plague descended on Kuch in 1812, followed by an earthquake in 1819. Few would think twice about leaving the inhospitable terrain that Kuch had become. Moreover, and unlike the merchants from Sindh, the sailors from Kuch relied on a measurable advantage in Muscat. Sell directly to the Al Busaid ruling family without going through a middleman. Unable to compete, many Sindhis left for Bahrain, where the pearl trade was flourishing at this time. For Muscat, the Kuchis were ideally placed as they fulfilled a simple task of carrying goods between India and Oman without establishing permanent roots in the city, and they had the support of the ruling family. Sayyid Sa'id bin Sultan incidentally is one of those longest ruling monarchs, almost 50 years. He is probably one or two of the most important men in contemporary Omani history because he ruled for such a long period of time, 50 years. He hired many Kuchis to act as his agents and brokers. A few were entrusted with important administrative posts in government, as Batia Kuchis proved valuable allies when he expanded his influence in Zanzibar and conquered most of the East African coast. Said entrusted most of this trade in the hands of key Kuchi families who ensured that the ruler's coffers were permanently replenished. After all, business is business. When Zanzibar produced goods, for example, Kuchis purchased some for the Muscat market as well, thereby satisfying legal needs, and in the process increased their economic clout. By 1840, there were an estimated 2,000 Kuchis who lived in Muscat, unquestionably becoming the principal mercantile power in the city. Only the accession of Imam Azan bin Qais and his desire to impose a fundamentalist Ibadi regime disrupted the beneficial relationship. Again, many Indians left the internecine environment of Muscat and Oman in 1868. This is a dark period that lasted for several years, but when the damage was done, scores of Hindus resettled elsewhere. To be sure, a younger generation replaced those who retired, as Turki bin Said recognized how important the commercial role of the Banyans were in his country's prosperity. Equally important were the intra-family disputes in Oman that resulted in the loss of existing commercial advantages to members of the remaining Indian community. After about 1870, Indian merchants regained in strength. They became favorite lenders to the ruling family. Some say they held the ruling family hostage, literally, because they were the ones with the cash. And this prominence earned leading members of the community additional political advantages that persuaded many to overlook periodic setbacks. Unlike the earlier period, Hindu religious celebrations were once again tolerated, special dietary laws were respected. Most importantly, Kuchi and Gujarati were retained as spoken languages, and many Indians learned Arabic at this time as well. In the end, however, Hindus in Muscat made no attempt to assimilate in Omani society except to protect their economic situations. Indian-Omani relations entered their most difficult period under British rule. This is not a surprise. In 1875, London decreed that anyone who had settled in Muscat after the British assumed direct control over this native territory of India, they could obtain British protection. The vast majority of Indian merchants qualified, and because of this unique privilege, disputes over jurisdiction in legal matters became more frequent, pitting Omani and British officials on opposite ends. Indian merchants took advantage of this rare opportunity, and in doing so bypassed Muscati authority over them. It must also be emphasized that the Indian community's association with the British was a double-edged sword. To be sure, the relationship insulated them from Omani interferences, but it increased the guilt by association sentiments that developed among Omanis. There is little doubt that many of the problems Indian merchants encountered with Omanis were directly related to New Delhi's relationship with the British. Many Indian merchants, including those who served Oman quite well, were viewed as agents of British designs for Oman. For all the benefits that British protection allegedly ushered in, the privilege undermined the credibility of the ruling family, who were accused by ordinary people of kowtowing to every British desire. Now, because of this legacy, official contacts between Delhi and Muscat were minimal, as I said, for most of the 20th century. And even after Sultan Taimur bin Faisal abdicated his throne in 1932, incidentally, Sultan Faisal bin Taimur preferred to live in Bombay and ruled Oman from Bombay, and he ended up abdicating his power to his son when he was still in Bombay. He didn't even bother to go home to abdicate. So he sent a decree to his son saying, "Now you're the Sultan, I'm staying here, enjoying my life, you can do whatever you want." He retired in Bombay. Taimur, who remained in India until his death in 1965, admired Indian society and felt a particular affinity for its sophistication. Of course, he married an Indian woman too, so that helps. His son, Saeed bin Taimur, the gentleman that you referred to, and who ruled before Sultan Qaboos, was similarly inclined, that is, he was very pro-Indian, because he received most of his education in the Chief's College, which was a British school run in Ajmer. Despite this association, however, the first few decades of the 20th century were characterized by a self-imposed isolation, because Saeed bin Taimur was very much of an introvert. He decided that he did not want to spend money he didn't have, and that kind of stuff. Yet the Indian consulate in Muscat played a useful role, as Delhi did not neglect key contacts that were deemed important for the post-British period. For India, discreet contacts with Omani officials meant that the trade relations could resume after the overwhelming British interferences were removed. This is the beauty of the Indian approach. The Indians realized that they would be there for the long haul, even after the British would leave. And I submit to you that this is one of the things that is going on right now as well. The British, the French, the Americans, and all these foreign merchants / troops that are on the Arabian Peninsula will eventually leave and go home. The Indians are aware of this. They will be closer to the neighborhood, and they are planning ahead. It's part of the thesis that I need to develop more. I haven't really thought out all of the ramifications of this, but I'm inclined to believe this to be a fact. Everyone knew that without the significant Indian merchant community, business life in Muscat would come to a halt, as only Indians were considered to be suitable to run the Sultanate's economic engine. I'll give you some example in a second of what I mean. Because of this understanding, no one in Delhi was under any illusion that the situation could continue ad infinitum. When in March 1950, London informed Delhi that Muscat had given a formal notice of termination of its 1939 Treaty of Commerce and Navigation, India took the initiative actually. It responded quite positively to Sultan Saeed bin Taimur's call for a separate agreement and signed a really forward-looking Treaty of Friendship, Commerce and Navigation in March 1953. Again, this is something that plans for the long haul. The first treaties of friendship, therefore, now are almost 100 years old between India and several of the Arab countries. Similar treaties exist with Bahrain, with Qatar, with the Emirates, and with Saudi Arabia, as well as Kuwait. The new accord extended political recognition as well as the establishment of consulates and most favored nation treatment in trade. It distinguished itself in yet another way. Although Britain enjoyed unprecedented influence in both Muscat and Delhi, as the treaty buttressed British claims at the United Nations when the whole question of Oman was in full debate in the world body towards the end of the 1960s, early 1970s, it also recognized the importance of bilateral relations between Oman and India. Still, no matter how unpleasant British interferences were, India's positive response to Sultan Saeed bin Taimur occurred despite the watchful eye of the British political agent. And this is an important point, that the Indians looked through the British political agent and continued on the path that they wanted to. They did not allow the British political agent to stand in the way. New economic ground rules were being established, whether London liked it or not, and whether we could control them or not. Now let me briefly look at the post-1970 period before I stop, and this is under Qaboos, when Qaboos comes to power. Now a large number of Omanis who were living in exile under Sultan Said bin Taimur, because Said bin Taimur was such a closed man, he wouldn't even allow education. He wouldn't even allow Omanis to go to school. It was forbidden to go to school. Why do you need to be educated? This land cannot support educated people, he used to say. So a lot of families used to kidnap their own children and take them out of the country illegally. Nobody would know about it, and educate them in places like Bahrain or Basra or Baghdad or Beirut or Cairo, so that many of these folks got their education there. So after 1970, many of them returned, and Qaboos adopted his openness policy. Doors of the country opened to entrepreneurs ready to participate in the building boom, as Oman lacked and needed everything. Since the great majority of Omanis tended to be more interested in commerce than in politics, the Indian merchant community faced its first real competition from the indigenous population. Yet despite this new element in Omani-Indian relations, the Indian community really distinguished itself by providing proven expertise at prices lower than their Western competitors. Indian firms earned important contracts. They're the ones to rebuild the famous Al-Alam Palace. If you look at postcards of Muscat, you see this beautiful building, almost rectangular in size, with blue and gold covers. That is really now the guest house. It's when important dignitaries arrive, they stay there. But this was rebuilt entirely by an Indian company. Additional contributions made were building in much of the Sultanate's infrastructure. Indians supplied the pool of middle managers. Most of the healthcare professionals at the Royal Hospital, for example, were Indian, they still are. A number of school teachers came from the subcontinent as well. The political indifference so prevalent in India's outlook towards Oman since the turn of the century was definitely replaced by a concerted effort to propel relations at a higher plane. Now, although India failed to respond to Omani calls for military assistance during the civil war in the Dhofar between 1960 and 1975, Delhi could not remain indifferent to regional security matters after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan on Christmas Day 1979. A few months after the invasion, Sayyid Fahar bin Taimur, the Deputy Prime Minister for Security Affairs at the time, visited Delhi to discuss military ties with then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. The effort was undertaken despite, perhaps because, of the well-known Indian-Soviet relationship. Fahar sought to strengthen and expand Indo-Omani relations in military training and counter-terrorism. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, shared the Omani apprehension because the conflict brought the USSRs so much closer to India's borders. Moreover, from an Indian strategic point of view, Delhi was amply aware, cognizant, if you would like. Did the voice stop? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Something happened to the... Did I do something wrong? It's the Indians. They're taking over. I love the Indians. What happened to my pocket? It's the billions of dollars that I'm carrying in my pocket. Now what is coming to? Okay. Can you hear me now? All right. The show goes on, don't worry. As we say in Hollywood, the show goes on. Now, as I was saying, from the Indian perspective, the fact that Delhi was amply cognizant that the Soviet Union's action obviously had a reaction because the US military presence in the Indian Ocean increased dramatically, and the Indians were aware that they had to do something about the fact that the Soviets beat in Afghanistan, it would be natural that the Americans would be close in the Indian Ocean. At a time when India was championing non-alignment and rejected all superpower involvement in the affairs of developing countries, the Omani position actually was worth noting. And over time, India came to play a key role in regional negotiations between conservative Arab Gulf monarchies and the Soviet Union at that time. During the Iran-Iraq War, for example, between 1980 and 1988, the Omani minister in charge of foreign affairs, Sultan Qaboos is his own foreign minister. The foreign minister, his title is Minister in Charge for Foreign Affairs. Yusuf bin Alawi, very nice guy. Yusuf bin Alawi was one of the rebels that fought in the Dhofar civil war against the Sultan. In 1971, the Sultan forgave those who wanted to come back. And Yusuf bin Alawi was one of these individuals that returned, abandoned the war, returned, and eventually was entrusted with this position, which he still occupies now. You know, he's still the minister in charge of foreign affairs. Alawi went to Moscow and had a number of messages conveyed to Moscow. All of them were done through Delhi, incidentally. So therefore, India played a critical role between the GCC countries and the Soviet Union. Many of these GCC countries had no diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union at the time, even if the Soviet Union was the first country to recognize the independence of Saudi Arabia in 1932. Sometimes we forget these things, but it's worth remembering. But the relations, of course, were in abeyance. They were never really cut back. They were never severed, if you would like. They were just simply put in abeyance, in suspension, if you would like. Now, to bring the story closer here, in November 1985, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi visited Muscat to celebrate the Sultanate's 15th national anniversary. Incidentally, at the end of the month, on the 30th, the Sultan is celebrating 40 years on the throne, and the Queen of England, and of course yours truly, will be there too, but of course she's more important than I am. We all know that queens and kings are important people. But it was very kind of them to invite me as well to the celebration. A number of heads of states were present, allowing for several bilateral discussions, including key meetings with Sri Lankan National Security Minister at the time. And of course, President of Pakistan, Zia-ul Haq, was also present. Qaboos, however, made it a point, even when Zia was present in Muscat, to actually have a very public meeting with Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, with a full exchange, which is rare in Oman. The Sultan is a very private person. He does not believe in extrovert. But at that time, everybody noticed that this was a very public meeting. And he expressed his confidence that ties between the two countries would move along, reviewed with Gandhi a variety of security questions that preoccupied the Omani ruler at the time. They discussed sensitive security matters. They pledged to foster relations in this area as well, and signed an important memorandum of understanding to streamline Indian military assistance to Oman. This was, let me give you an example of how smart the Indian step was at this time. This is when the two countries agreed that an estimated 150 dentists from India who were serving in the Indian armed forces were deputized to go to Oman and serve for a 2-year period in the Sultan's armed forces. This is a concrete example of how one gains trust between countries like this. You're entrusting the health of your soldiers to very close allies. Incidentally, you might know this, but the British ruled over Oman and the UAE and Bahrain and Qatar and Kuwait for 150 years. And they did not bother to build a single hospital there throughout the 150 years. Not one hospital was built. That gives you an idea of these kinds of agreements when they are signed and how valuable they can be to really foster close relationships between neighboring countries. There are other examples like this, but I won't bore you with them. I'll skip over some of this information because time is running late. Let me talk about the community, the Indian community since the 1970s. The number of Indian workers in Oman grew exponentially as well. In 1980, there were 70,000. In 2008, there are 700,000 Indians working in the Sultanate of Oman. In addition, obviously, to the large pool brought in for manual labor, as I said, Indian healthcare professionals flocked in droves, and in as much as this community grew in numbers, there were some incidents that were certainly ugly. Some Indian merchants and employees were deported, but others were replaced. Suffice it to say that of the 700,000 or so Indian expatriate workers in the Sultanate of Oman today, a majority of them are either in the middle class or upper middle class positions. There are an estimated 4,000 physicians, Indian physicians who are working in Oman. In the private sector, we also have many Indians with managerial skills that are working in the banks, in the bureaucracies, mostly in the private sector. But many of these problems have been replaced by business-like approaches between the communities as numbers and reputations increased as well. The debt of gratitude was repaid really by the industriousness of both sides in the relationship. Now, let me conclude by giving you one or two other episodes that would be interesting. At the beginning of my talk, I mentioned some of the numbers that we're going to see for the entire GCC countries in terms of energy relationships in the future. Oman does not have the kind of petroleum that Saudi Arabia enjoys, but it does have natural gas. It is estimated that it may have as much natural gas as India has, perhaps another 40 to 45 trillion cubic feet. The problem is to transport it from Oman to India. A variety of options have been discussed, including building an underground pipeline, underwater pipeline, but obviously the sea is too deep in this part of the Indian Ocean, almost 3,000 meters deep, and technology is not at that level yet. You know, roughly, if I'm not mistaken, the deep water technology is about 1,000 meters now. There might be scientists here who know better, but 3,000 meters is fairly deep, so it's not working. So therefore, the project that everybody was talking about in the 1990s did not happen. Instead, Oman is building a liquefied natural gas facility in a place called Sur, not far from Muscat. And eventually, these liquefied natural gas facility will primarily work for the Indian market. That's one example that is going to happen. It looks like it's going to happen. Now, Delhi, although Delhi was indifferent to Omani affairs, in fact, for the whole GCC affairs, you might want to say, for the British period that we discussed, it maintained back-channel lines of communication, not only with Saeed bin Taimur, but throughout the Gulf countries as well. India was looked upon with some favor, not only because of its historical legacy that I touched upon, as well as sophisticated political outlook after World War II, but also, excuse me, because of its public stance in the polarizing United Nations debate on the question of Oman. The question of Oman was really debated at the UN, and many Arab countries didn't even know what to make of the situation. They couldn't even find Oman on a map at the League of Arab States in Cairo. They were wondering, where is this country? And of course, the question arose because there was a secessionist movement between the Imam on the one hand, the religious leader of the country, and the Sultan, Saeed bin Taimur, and eventually Qaboos bin Saeed. Obviously, eventually, the Sultan's position prevailed, and the imamate in Oman was dissolved. The Imam fled to Tehran, Saudi Arabia, and finished his days there. But during the question of Oman discussion, debates, the majority of Arab states voted against Oman. Delhi either supported the Sultan in Muscat or abstained. This policy was not the result of what the British High Commissioner counseled, but because of the special relationship that India maintained with the Sultan. And the favor was reciprocated by Qaboos in 1971 during the thorny debate over Bangladesh. Unlike the overwhelming number of Arab states, and despite the fact that it was a new member of the world body, Muscat abstained. It was the only Muslim state not to fully support Pakistan and voted for its principles. The Omani vote illustrated how Muscat intended to behave in the international arena, and I submit to you this is how the Gulf states will behave with India in the foreseeable future as well. Rather than let development set the agenda, Oman and the GCC countries adhered to established principles and tried not to deviate from them. It was not an act of reticence, but a conscious decision to state what they believed, in even if the consequences were severe sometimes. Oman, for example, argued that the Indian-Pakistani disputes were a bilateral concern and that the two countries should resolve differences without outside interferences. To be sure, Qaboos offered his good offices and opined on a number of occasions that all conflicts in the area were detrimental to regional security. He hoped that cooler heads would prevail so that the welfare of all states around the Indian Ocean was preserved. Still, such statements proved far more useful than belligerent pronouncements or one-sided votes at the UN. They also indicated that Oman would not be party to religious conflicts. Incidentally, Oman is the only Arab country that has never, ever broken diplomatic relations with a country after it was established. It has never happened. Not even with Libya. It has never happened. That's something to think about as well. A significant characteristic of Omani foreign policy, one that grew heavily on tolerant Ibadi teachings, was Muscat's abhorrence of religious wars. This was unique in the area, and for Qaboos too, as well as the majority of Omanis. Muslims and Hindus could certainly live in peace, as they had done for centuries in the Sultanate, without generating internecine warfare. Now, in the early 2000s, obviously as India grew in importance in Omani perceptions, and as Muscat looked at the vast markets on the subcontinent, not only as a source of investment, but also as a country with whom interdependence would generate mutually beneficial results, this becomes obvious for all the GCC countries as well, that the Indian GCC relations need to be preserved. Let me simply close once again by thanking you for your attention, and to simply add that this is only scratching at the surface. A lot more needs to be done to assess the nascent GCC-Indian alliance, but believe me, it's coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that extremely informative presentation. And as we always do, we will open the floor to comments and questions you might have. If you would please identify yourself and try to make your comment or question as succinct as possible, we would appreciate it. Yes, please, we'll start with you.
I'm Karthik from the MPB program here in the first year. Lived in Oman for about 8 years, but long back, and I was a little disappointed, unfortunately, with the fact that this covered so much more of Oman and so little of GCC itself. But I have a question more pertaining to the GCC than Oman. Is that, as you rightly mentioned, Oman doesn't have the oil that the others have. And the numbers that you talked about, the percentages in terms of India's trade being with the GCC is all in oil, and it's all with Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar. Less so probably Qatar. So, and I think it's the fact that the Oman does not have the arrogancy of the oil money that makes it such a valuable partner. Whereas with the UAE and with Saudi Arabia, the arrogancy, again, as I say, with the fact that they have so much oil, makes it so much difficult to actually establish a relationship with them. Just to throw one point, of which I wanted to ask was, Kuwait, when India tried to establish a minimum wage rule with Kuwait recently, and said that we won't be processing any labor visas to Kuwait if you don't establish a minimum wage because conditions were so bad. Kuwait basically responded saying that, you know what, we're going to stop processing all the white-collar job visas as well that are coming into Kuwait from India. And India only had to backtrack basically, you know, because they couldn't jeopardize all those white-collar jobs that it would lose out on if it let all these laborers, you know, not go. So essentially, India just had to sidestep and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I need the money that they're going to remit. So I don't see the parallel between Oman and the rest of the GCC happening the way I think you've said. I mean, I'm not saying that you've actually said it that way, but so essentially I think the rest of the GCC still remains a bit of a mystery, and I think their responses will not be anything like what Oman has given all the history and the niceties that have happened between Oman and India. So
That's an excellent question. Well, I'm going to try to prove you wrong. That's what I'm going to work on, the thesis. On the contrary, I do believe that in fact Oman represents the model for the other GCC countries. Let me address this because you asked a critical question. When you touched upon the arrogance of oil, obviously in a country like Saudi Arabia that sits on 260, 70 billion barrels of petroleum, and now is a member of G20, an economy that is $500 billion GDP. You cannot neglect that. This is, you can say that it's the arrogance of oil, and you will not be wrong. But there is nothing wrong in being arrogant in the resources that you have. Now, if you have a problem with the fact that the Saudis have oil, take it up with the Creator. You know, I mean, if you find that God is arrogant by giving the Arab country of Saudi Arabia oil, you know, that's not their fault. The fact that they have it is theirs. You know, obviously, you know, I live in the United States, as you know. Many Americans consider Saudi oil to be our oil. It's not anybody's oil, it's Saudi Arabia's oil, and they can sell it to whoever they want. And if you want to buy it, you buy it. However, as I've tried to, the reason why I use the Omani example first is, and I can make similar cases for the UAE, for Saudi Arabia, for Bahrain, for Qatar, even for Kuwait. The one country that I am not going to be able to do this correctly is Yemen. I will do it for all the GCC countries if I have enough time to do the research. It's because of the long established Indian presence throughout the region. The Indians have been around for a long time. And the GCC countries that have always had a Western outlook are finally changing their outlook. They are beginning to look east. And they're going to do the Omani model because they know what the Omanis have succeeded in accomplishing so far. Sultan Qaboos, incidentally, at the GCC summits, I have attended a few of these GCC summits, and I see the 6 monarchs walk into the room in the public. You know, they have a public session for journalists and so on, and they invite scholars like myself to go and sit and listen to their opening and closing speeches and so on and so forth. It's a fascinating environment to observe. All of the Gulf leaders, and I've been doing this for 25 years, really defer to Qaboos. Qaboos is an extremely educated man, Sandhurst Academy graduate, military man, but more than that, he's a cultured person. He's a man of the world. He's cultured. He listens to music. He plays instruments as well. He reads. He travels. He sees places. So he's been to India a few times. You know, his ancestors married Indian women. They also married Japanese women and a few others. In monarchies, you know, they like to interbreed. So you have all these contacts over the years. I'm going to try. You know, I'm not there yet. I'm going to try to make the case that in fact the GCC countries are going to use the Omani models to accomplish this. Now, finally, on the question of Kuwait, in terms of the blue collar versus white collar. As I'm sure you know, Kuwait is, since you've lived in the area, Kuwait is in a very difficult situation right now. It is struggling in a parliamentary life that has taken on a life of its own. And some of these questions, expatriate presence, white collar work, women's role in society, health issues, and there are about 20 of them on the table. all of these are being used by different political parties against each other, and it just so happens that the government sometimes is stuck in the middle by issuing these kinds of declarations to appease one side or the other. See what I'm saying? But on the other hand, Kuwaitis have also done something very interesting, and the Qataris are following suit now. They want to abolish the entire sponsorship rule, whereby companies can hire directly without having local sponsors. At that time, needless to say, that the Omani merchants and the Omani companies are going to do much better because they're so much more qualified and much more affordable than a counterpart from Britain or France. And as I said at the beginning of my talk, the education level in India now, there's nothing left to be desired, trust me. I mean, it's on par with the very best of the very best. I dare you to get into Karakuj. I'm sure you can. Give it a shot.
I graduated from there.
Oh, congratulations. I stand corrected.
No, I'm not saying this. It's just that I still think you've not answered it. I'm sorry, I'm being a bit of a pain, but the thing is that recently I lived in the UAE as an employer. That was, I mean, as a worker, and before it was as a student in Oman. I just see that the Middle East, as the rest of the Middle East, except for Oman, is still so fantasized by the West. You know, they still cater to the, you know, the...
I'm not disputing that. I
Right,
agree.
so
I agree with
that
you.
mentality will not change unless they essentially get a leader like Sultan Qaboos who's well-read, who's educated, and that doesn't essentially seem to be happening because you don't hear that in the news.
You are pessimistic. I am optimistic. That's the difference. You are saying nothing is going to change,
Right.
and they're not going to be able to do this. And I'm saying let's be optimistic. And I see certain trends. And inshallah, God is great. Inshallah, people will do the right thing. But I agree. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that there is a lot more work to be done. I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah, but if there's a succession issue in Oman where, you know, the best leader in the GCC with respect to India, essentially, you know,
You
does not-
always go with the best.
but he
You
may not
always
be
go
around
with
for
the
long.
best.
He may not be around for long.
He is only 66 years old, you know.
Okay, good.
Let God give him a long life.
I think it's time for another question.
Yeah.
Please.
Hello. Okay, I'm also an MPP first year student.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
I'm also an MPP first year student. My name's Tanvi, and I also grew up for many years in Abu Dhabi.
Uh-huh.
And it's just following on the same vein as Karthik. There are a lot of Indians there, but there's a lot of disdain for Indians in general, even in the oil sector in which my family works. And a variation on this is how much of this is sustained by the Western presence? Do they want to maintain this kind of image? Because if you see in oil contracts, the Western companies, in the bidding process, they often get Indian companies kicked out. Like recently there was a deal with, they got Larsen Turbo kicked out over a small scrimmage, you know, just a quality problem or something. So how much of it is fabricated? And do you think there is scope for India to leverage its growing international presence to kind of change the dynamics in the Middle East? Maybe get America to support Indian industries in the oil sector?
This is also an excellent question. To some extent, part of what you're saying is true, that the GCC leaders, Qaboos, certainly Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, Abdullah is very aware of India. He's been there twice already. He's going to go once when he was king, once when he was heir apparent. He's going to go again. To a certain extent, they are using India as a leverage against the West. No question about that. But there is more to the story than that. I mean, obviously, we all know that international relations, the game of nations, if you would like, diplomacy is played like this. When you try to take advantage of a situation and use an opportunity when it becomes available. But I personally believe that there is more to the story than that. And the reason why I say this is because it's reciprocated from the Indian side. You see what I'm saying? That, I mean, this thing is working on both sides. I mean, there are people in India who are quite aware of the importance of the GCC beyond access to energy resources. If the Indian government and the Indian business community is only looking at the GCC as a source of petroleum, as a gas station, let's say, then what you're saying is correct. But I believe that they're not just looking at the Arabian Peninsula as a gas station. They're also looking at the Arabian Peninsula as an area where they can expand trade, they have important relations, they have important political ties. There are going to be tensions because these are monarchies and India is a democracy. Okay? Whichever way you like to explain it, it's still a functioning democracy. Some people don't like the way it functions, but it is a functioning democracy. And the Gulf countries are monarchies. And as such, the system of government, the system of rule, the power and authority of the rulerships is completely different. But there is enough to allow these two poles to interact positively. Now, there are a couple of problems here in terms of strategy. There is obviously Pakistan, a historical problem. There is also Iran, an increasingly important power in the region. The GCC countries have come to resolve their disputes with Iran, which is not about to happen tomorrow. This is a long-term conflict that's now under preparation. The whole Sunni-Shia conflict that could blow, literally, although cooler heads will hopefully prevail and prevent that from occurring, because if we're gonna go back to religious wars, that would mean that we learned nothing in 1,000 years of human history, okay? But that's a parenthesis. But nevertheless, despite Pakistan, despite Iran, despite even China, because China is also has its long-term interests on the Arabian Peninsula, I think the Indians are much better placed than either of these major powers, either of China, either Western Europe, not even the United States, not even the traditional powers that have always enjoyed privileges in this part of the world. India is the new alliance that is going to come more important for the GCC countries, and chiefly for the same reason that I've touched upon in this presentation, that the Indian rulers historically have understood and accepted the realities of the GCC and not tried to find regime change and not tried to impose a new system of government, not try to overthrow this guy or that guy, not try to place fuel over the fire of religious animosities that exist. For these reasons, the Indians are better off in terms of position. That's my thesis.
Let me throw in a skeptical question here, because I would have thought, and I really haven't studied the Indian relationship so much, but I would have thought if I were a typical ruler of a GCC country, I would think, first of all, India is not a friendly place. India is not a friendly place partly because it is not Muslim. Of course, it is Muslim to an extent, but it's already not Muslim. Whereas Pakistan is. Moreover, Pakistan has been supportive of issues that public opinion, certainly, in the region, feels strongly about. And we know, of course, that in Saudi Arabia, and I suspect in other countries, they have looked to Pakistan for technical assistance, military assistance, security assistance, and so forth. GCC rulers like to go hunting in Pakistan. They like to take their falcons and hunt the great bustard in Pakistan. Moreover, if you were looking down the road and you were a Gulf ruler, wouldn't you look at India as a security threat, not as a friendly place? India could roll over the Gulf countries without very much trouble, and perhaps it would have reason to do so, given the fact that India is so heavily dependent on the Middle East for oil. So my skeptical question then is, isn't it possible to think of the Gulf leadership looking at India as an opportunity, to be sure, but also with a jaundiced eye?
This is true. That's also an excellent question, which I need to develop more. India could be perceived as a security threat from the GCC countries. In fact, there are some people in the GCC countries that are saying today that the 20 million or so estimated expatriate workers, of whom 5 to 7 million in the Gulf are from India, could be fifth columnists, and they could sabotage and put the place under control. This is also true. They could do that, but I don't think that the security threat is in the nature of the Indian compact in the future. Look, the way I'm going to handle this question is the following. I'm going to use the example of Europe. Europe and European countries have practiced the art of killing better than anybody else for millennia. And during the last century, they fought two of the bloodiest wars in contemporary history. But since 1950 or so, I would make the argument that the Europeans essentially have given up on warfare to settle their disputes. They've reached a point in their life when they're saying, been there, done that. We don't want to be in the killing business anymore. The United States, Britain to a certain extent as a kind of appendage to Europe, Canada, Australia, a few of these still growing countries, they have not given up the killing business yet. They're still in the business of military-industrial complex. The parallel that I want to draw with India is that given the history of India and the tragedies of that society, I think that the Indians in the future will espouse the European model, that they're not going to be in the killing business to settle their strategic interests, that they're going to opt for a different route. Now, that doesn't mean that they will not go to war again, as they have with Pakistan twice in contemporary history. It doesn't mean that they will not be forced into a conflict. They might, I mean, I don't know, they might do that. But from the GCC perspective, this Pakistani boogeyman, in my view, is no longer a tenable position. And I'll tell you why. The relationship between Pakistan, a Muslim country, certainly, with most of the GCC countries has been negative. It has not been positive. There is a lot of lip service being paid to Pakistan. When Zia-ul-Haq, for example, was president of Pakistan, there was always this relationship that was developed in terms of military ties with Saudi Arabia, that there was a full Pakistani brigade stationed in Saudi Arabia protecting the holy sites and so on. You don't find many Pakistani soldiers in Saudi Arabia anymore. On the contrary, you have Chinese who are looking at the missiles. You have a few Indians who are in the counterterrorism effort helping out. So you have this diversification, a little bit away from Pakistan, because most people in the Gulf, especially in governments of the Gulf countries, are realizing what a powder keg Pakistan has become, especially with its fundamentalist underground. That is no longer underground, really, it's above ground now. So you have this very difficult relationship between Pakistan and the GCC countries. But for public consumption, it's still not okay to say anything about it, because obviously it's a Muslim country and you have to show solidarity. Even a country like Egypt, I mean, the mother of all Arab countries, the most critical Arab country, is very sometimes vocal about excesses in Pakistan that you did not hear before. Hosni Mubarak has several times said some nasty things about the Pakistani authorities, especially when it comes to underground movements and so on and so forth. So therefore, Michael, the way I would answer your question is, while I think that one cannot neglect the tensions that exist in this part of the world, Pakistan, India, China, India, and so on, these strategic issues. And while GCC countries are small fish, you know, Indians can eat them up very quickly. I don't think it's in their character, and I think that there is enough foresight that in the future, this is not the kind of behavior that we will be engaged in.
Dr. Rahman?
I'm Ataur Rahman. I'm a senior research fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thank you. I think we are looking for your lecture before, and I think it's a nice presentation. And first of all, I just want to see this GCC-India. Why do you call it an alliance? Because nowadays we don't hear of that alliance, because GCC may have many partners, like the United States has so many partners now. Similarly, India may have different partnerships with different countries. It may be strategic, it may be economic or political, But if you argue only that because of the historical close relationship of a particular country or couple of countries, there is going to be an alliance, you don't really find those conditions, like on what are the basis for that alliance. And the world is now in such a profound change, and the shifting patterns of relationship is very difficult to really predict. You can see evolving cooperation between GCC and India. This is my one question. The second question is, as you argued that India is heavily dependent, as you know, on GCC, on oil. But can India remain only on GCC? Like, what about Iranian dependence? Because India is also keeping its option open with Iran. Even the United States is against Iranian relationship. I think, so you have to think of the other, or Turkey, or any other country. They can have good trade relations. So India is open there. So it cannot be just a structured alliance, or kind of alliance you are talking only based on historical relationship. And that is very difficult to think about. So thank you very much.
Thank you for both. These are excellent suggestions. Now, I have put the word alliance because I had to come up with a title when Professor Hudson asked me to come up with a title, and I am thinking of doing this. Maybe I will not use the title in the paper when it's finished and the research effort that I would like to embark on. Maybe I will think of collective security matters. Maybe I will think of a totally different name. This is just a working title now for this presentation. So I haven't really ironed out all of the consequences of every one of these relationships. Bear with me on that one. But I will take your recommendation under very strong advisement and reassess whether or not alliance is the proper relationships to have. My point was, when I came up with it, that I saw in the international arena a new bloc emerging, an underestimated bloc emerging, namely the GCC in India. There is, maybe I'm wrong in this assessment, but it's my evaluation. Everything that I'm studying, everything that I'm writing on, everything that I'm reading leads me to believe that I see something new emerging here, and that I should focus on it, and others should focus on it. This is just not one person's research. Thousands of people should really work on this. And I have a few Indian friends at Nehru University who've been very generous with me in the past and welcoming me, with whom I've had this conversation before. They are very much interested. Incidentally, at Nehru University, I'm sure you know, there is a Gulf Research Center, which is something really nice. I mean, historically, all of these Gulf Research Centers are located in England or the United States. Now you have them in a place like India as well. I'm sure the Chinese are also thinking of establishing these kinds of centers to train people, not just in the language skills, but also in terms of studying the societies. Your second point about Iran is very important. And I would add not just Iran, I would also add Central Asian republics, the stans that have emerged after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, all of these countries are critical, not just for India, but for the entire international community. The consequence of this emerging relationship is that India, China, Europe, and the United States are all going to compete for the same pool of oil from the Persian Gulf. This includes Iran as well. But Iran's oil is not as significant as the others. Iran has more natural gas than oil. Its natural gas pool is much larger. It has the world's either second or third, I think, natural gas reserves, third. The first one is Qatar, the second one is Russia, and the third one is Iran, if I'm not mistaken. And some of this gas is a disputed territory in the Persian Gulf between Qatar and Iran over the North Dome. There are all kinds of conflict that need to be ironed out. At any rate, Iran's oil and gas resources are important, as are Central Asia, and India will not put all of its eggs in the GCC basket. It will want to have also relationships with Iran, but Iran is also changing dramatically. It's becoming a nuclear power. Iran probably will get the nuclear bomb before long, despite what everybody is trying to do to prevent that. You know, for the life of me, I don't see how this can be prevented, but maybe I'm wrong. Therefore, India has to take into calculation Iran not just as a potential source of oil, but a potential nuclear source of oil. And then there is one other country that we did not talk about, which also plays an important role, namely Israel in the Middle East. India has very important and close relations with Israel. It has developed them over the years and continues to have preferential treatment with Israel. So therefore, the Arab-Israeli baggage will also have to factor into this entire strategic equation. Hopefully this will be sorted out, but I haven't gotten that far yet. I haven't gotten that far.
Sorry?
Thank you. I'm going to abuse my microphone privileges for a moment. Thank you, Saz, for a very informative talk, and I think it would be very interesting to see this sort of case study on the other GCC states, and maybe even the other emerging markets in the region. My only point that I dispute is I think Egypt is now playing the role of an evil stepmother, more than just the mother of the Arab nations. In any case.
That was figure of speech. Don't take everything that I say so seriously.
My question to you refers to sort of the more, excuse my ignorance, and I don't know much about Oman in particular, but more with the UAE especially, we often read about the status of migrant workers and Indian workers as second-class citizens, as the victims of many human rights abuses. And my question is that if this sort of treatment persists, and meanwhile the number of migrants continues to increase, how long will the Indians, both in the countries and in India, be okay with this sort of treatment of their citizens? And while I recognize that you said that many of them are middle to upper middle class, I think there's a large swath that are not and are being treated poorly. And moreover, for the companies themselves, the Indian companies operating in these regions, we recently heard from a scholar working on Indian oil companies in the Sudan, and their reluctance to submit to any sort of norms of social corporate responsibility. Can you please address that? Oh, and I'm right at
No, I'm taking note because this is very important. And I need to address this issue very seriously. The conditions of expatriate workers in general, in Indian and others, in some of the Gulf countries are nothing but abhorrent. I have seen with my own eyes some of this treatment, and not only I disapprove, but I strongly condemn it. And it is unfortunate, but that it happens, and it happens frequently. One should not deny the reality on the ground. Now, what needs to be done, however, this is outside the context of my own presentation. But if I would, in fact, I have written a couple of columns on this question before. What the GCC countries need to develop are the social institutions that will increasingly make populations aware that this is not the way to treat human beings. We're not there yet, unfortunately. These societies as you have seen in the UAE, perhaps with your own eyes, did not exist 30 years ago as the countries that we see today on television or when we visit them. I remember the first time I went to Saudi Arabia in 81 or 80, something like that. I thought I was going to the desert. There was nothing there, nothing. The first time I went to the UAE in 1983, Abu Dhabi was a boondoggle. It was a hamlet. It was not even a village. And Dubai was not much better. If you go to Dubai today, you see this astronomical change that has occurred in one generation. Abuses are prevalent in this kind of a rapid rise because people take advantage and people get rich. This cannot go on, obviously. And you ask me, how long can this go on? It has gone on too long already. It should not. It should stop, period. But that's for the GCC societies to come to terms with. They have to accept. And not just in the GCC countries, incidentally. Filipino workers throwing themselves from balconies in Lebanese homes is also a reality, a fact of life, because they cannot take the abuses in a country as modern as Lebanon with all the things that it has to offer.
Although that's on a much more microscopic.
Well, it is microscopic, but it is microscopic, but nevertheless, the point is that these things should happen nowhere, and it has gone on too long. Now, in terms of the impact on India, I think that the Indian government, I know this for a fact, trust me. Don't ask me how I know this, because I'm not going to tell you. But I know this for a fact, that senior members of the Indian government, very senior members of the government, have brought up this issue with several GCC officials, and they're aware of it. And the GCC officials have committed themselves to addressing them. And in the UAE in particular, there is a Ministry of Social Affairs that is really looking into them. And now they're starting to put fines every time one of these abuse cases comes in. The companies that are involved in the human treatment, putting 50 people in one room housing situation, awful sanitary conditions and so on. For the first time in many, many years, people are being fined. So hopefully this will change the mentalities around. Are some of these companies socially responsible? No, they're not. I agree with you. They're not socially responsible. And this is part of the learning process. If the Omani case is any example, and this is perhaps the responsibility of on both sides, on the Indian side as well, to pass on part of the social responsibility, to kind of forge the relationships. I admit it's not easy, but it has got to be done. I mean, you can either complain and say, this is awful and it's bad and I condemn you, and then you go home and have a nice meal served to you by an Indian waiter, or you create the conditions whereby slowly but surely you make the changes that gradually empower people to take responsibility. So I agree with what you said.
May I?
Okay, quick follow-up.
Very quick follow-up. When we eventually, hopefully, get to the point where their human rights are protected, how long are they going to be okay with them having civil and political rights?
Well, the GCC countries you're talking about. Again, this is not the mandate of my talk, but I'm interested in these questions because obviously as a person that studies the GCC inside out, I actually wrote my dissertation on the GCC years ago, 1985 now. And incidentally, my advisor was an Iranian. So I have always had to factor in the Iranian factor in the assessments. But, I don't know how to answer you. I think that human rights will come eventually, but it's not going to happen soon. These are monarchies still. They have a long way to go. I'm sad to say this, perhaps another generation. Young people learning how to respect human life and so on. This starts at the school. This generation is not going to change. The current generation, middle-aged men and women like myself, men of my generation, it's very difficult to change them. But the younger people that are coming up in school, that are learning, the curriculums in these universities now are very different than what they were. I have seen with my own eyes schools in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, where young children are really being exposed to human rights questions. When they come to power, things will change.
We'll take just maybe one more question. Yeah, I'd like you to, I think you want to follow up on something.
Yeah, just to follow up on the how long will India take this, or how long will things continue the way they are. There's already a very strong undercurrent of dislike for Middle Eastern remittance money from, let's say, the state of Kerala, which is the largest receiver of such remittances. If you go to the northern districts of Kerala today and you look at the development indices in terms of where the infrastructure is, where the education levels are, it's nowhere compared to where the rest of Kerala is. Essentially, they're just living off the money that's coming there, they're consuming it, they're buying their big cars from wherever else, but the local population is, education levels are low, no roads, nothing. So they've come to realize that, it's not exactly a boon for us to, just send our men when they're 18 years old to go work in the construction industry in the Middle East, because ultimately the return is not perennial. It's something that's transitory in nature. It will probably happen for the 20 years that this guy is able to actually work. And once that is done, and the country doesn't need him, he's going to come back here and there's nothing really left for him then. So essentially, I think that element of how long will India take will be decided by, how long will these people, sort of take to realize that, and I think the drive will come from here. And there's some sort of discord amongst the non-Islamic community in such areas, because they feel this sudden rise in wealth of the Islamic community, and you feel that people who were not wearing abayas and burqas about 20 years back, you suddenly see them starting to wear it, and show open signs of, this pro-Islamic tendency. And you can see that it's actually happening there in those places. And I think, people have started, their tensions have started building up to an extent. And I think when that reaches sort of a climax, things will start to sort of fall back, and people realize, it's not really exactly very conducive for this whole thing to happen. That's when the Indian government will probably step in, and say that, this is not really doing any good for my country, but it's...
Well, you touched on several things. On the first part, I will answer the following way. Making money is easy. Spending it is hard. You have to learn how to spend money. I'm sure that you in your own life will learn how to spend money and calculate. How people spend money, it's their business, So I'm not going to comment more on that. But on the question of abayas and things like that, in India there are other religions other than Hindus, Sikhs and so on, who also cover their hair. And we are seeing a increased outpouring of religious garments and so on. But in my view, this is temporary. This will not stick around for much longer. We're going through a phase. You're too young to remember this, but I'm going to remind you of something. That in the 1960s, which is not all that long time ago, but you're too young to remember it. Saudi women, when they wear abayas, they did not wear the abayas that were long skirt abayas. They were short abayas that went to the ankle, to the waist, and then the rest was held on the hand. And most of the abayas that Saudi women wore in the 1960s were see-through. You could see what they were wearing underneath. If a woman was wearing a blouse, with a cut, you could see obviously her chest. Now, of course, it has changed. Now, Saudi women are totally covered. But if you are in Jeddah, not in Riyadh, I'm coming on this trip from Jeddah. I've been there for the past month. I have seen with my own eyes Saudi women, not foreign women, Saudi women wearing a abaya but no head cover. So therefore, don't be so quick to judge these kinds of changes in societies, whether it's in India or elsewhere. Fashion comes and goes. Now, some people are religiously motivated. They are modest, and they want to wear a hijab, or they want to wear a niqab. They want to do these things. Well, that's their right. I mean, India is a democracy, and in a democracy, we're entitled to do whatever we want. If somebody wants to cover up, it's their right to do so. I think we have to be tolerant enough to do it. Where we are not in agreement with these folks, if they want to use that privilege for security purposes. And then I agree with you. Incidentally, at Saudi airports, when a woman that is totally covered with a niqab is on the way out, she has to uncover so that the officer can see her face. So therefore, so much for the niqab, as far as I'm concerned. Don't make those rough generalizations. Things come and go.
Just to look at it from the other direction, in my experience in the Gulf, and thinking of the Emirates in particular, there is, I think, growing discomfort on the part of the indigenous population that they are being overwhelmed by the expats. That Indians, Westerners, and so forth are beginning to squeeze and drown out the local people. And that there's a real concern that indigenous culture and religion is being threatened by the forces of globalization and massive labor migration and so on. So there are frictions, I think, probably at both ends of this relationship.
Oh, absolutely.
At any rate, we've come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank Professor Kechichian again, and we have a little present for him.
Oh, thank you.
Which is, he doesn't get the tray.
Is it my meal for tonight?
I thought we were going to give you the tray as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.